It was supposed to be the most important night of his life, but in the end, it was the night he lost everything. Mariana Torres spent more than a decade believing she had built the perfect life. A stable marriage, a comfortable home, and a successful husband. She always followed the rules, always did what was expected. But that night, she realized that maybe it had never been real. What would you do if, in an instant, everything you knew fell apart? The Grand Royal Ballroom shone under the light of the crystal chandeliers. Mariana was wearing an elegant red dress, the same one she had spent months saving up to buy. At her side was her husband, Enrique Vasconcelos, the renowned businessman who always seemed to have everything under control. The party was in full swing. Glasses were raised in toasts, smiles were exchanged between superficial conversations, but Mariana felt a knot in her stomach. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what. Then Enrique took the microphone. With the same confident posture as always, he smiled at the audience. "Life gives us opportunities to be honest with ourselves," he said. Silence filled the room. Mariana held her breath. "Today, I want to introduce everyone to the woman I truly love." The name that came out of Enrique's mouth made the ground disappear beneath her feet. It wasn't hers. For a moment, everything around Mariana seemed to dissolve. The sound of murmurs, the shocked expressions of the people around her, even the intense brightness of the chandeliers. Everything became a blur. Her gaze was fixed on Enrique, but he no longer saw her. He was looking at another woman. Camila Duarte, his young assistant, smiled at her side, receiving curious looks and some discreet expressions of disapproval. But the only thing Mariana could feel was the butterflies in her stomach of someone who realizes too late that she was living a lie. Her body moved before her mind could process what was happening. Before she knew it, she was outside, her hands shaking as she tried to hail a cab. Her heart was beating so fast she could barely breathe. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and asked if she was okay. But she had no answer. How could she explain? The man she loved, the man she had shared more than a decade of her life with, had just discarded her like a mistake that needed to be corrected. The drive home was a blur of tears and disjointed thoughts. But the worst part was yet to come. When she opened the door, everything looked exactly the same. The carefully chosen furniture, the wedding photos still hanging on the wall, Henry's familiar scent permeating the air. But this was no longer her home. As she looked around, a painful truth hit her. She had nowhere to go. The phone vibrated. A short, cold message. "The lawyers will be in touch with you. I'll keep the house. I hope you understand." Mariana dropped the phone on the couch as if she'd been shocked. Enrique hadn't even had the decency to speak to her in person. Was this how it ended? 12 years reduced to a text message. Mariana felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She looked around at every detail of the house she had considered a refuge for so long. Now, everything seemed strange, as if it were a visit from her own life. Did she really have nothing left? She tried to remember when everything started to go wrong. When did Enrique stop being the caring man she had known? The truth is that the clues were always there. She just chose not to see them. With no other choice, she began to pack her things. With each folded piece of clothing, each object placed in her suitcase, a memory came to mind. The day Enrique convinced her to quit her job because he didn't need to work. The birthday he forgot because he said he was too busy. The empty excuses, the fake smiles. How could she have been so blind? When she closed her suitcase, she realized that what was left of her life could fit into a single suitcase. Hours later, she stood at the door of the only place she could go. A cheap hotel in the city centre. The air smelled musty, the mattress was thin and uncomfortable, and the light flickered as if it were about to go out. None of that mattered. The real weight was inside her. How could a woman who had everything now have nothing? She looked at herself in the mirror in the small bathroom and barely recognized herself. Her face was swollen from crying, her eyes red, the expression of someone who didn't know what to do next. She tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. She picked up her cell phone and, against her own pride, wrote to Henrique. "We need to talk." The answer didn't come from him, but from an unknown number. "Any communication should be made through our lawyers." Mariana read that sentence over and over again. Henrique had already moved on. And she? What would she do now? Mariana clutched her cell phone tightly, feeling a mixture of anger and despair growing inside her. How could someone who had shared her entire life be so cold? But the worst part wasn't Henrique's response. The worst part was what was coming next. What would she do now? Without enough money to support herself for long, and with a practically empty resume after years of not working, her options were limited. For the first time, she felt the true weight of dependence. For years, Henrique had been her financial and emotional security. Now, he was nothing more than a name at the bottom of a divorce document. The next few days were a nightmare. Mariana tried to maintain a routine, but every step was a reminder of everything she had lost. She searched tirelessly for a job, sending out resumes for every opening she could find. But each interview ended with the same blunt phrase, "We need someone with recent experience." After 12 years away from the job market, she was invisible. The money in her pocket was dwindling rapidly, and with each passing day, the idea of moving back in with her parents, something she had promised herself she would never do, seemed more inevitable. Then, one sweltering afternoon, sitting in the small hotel room, counting the few bills she had left, her phone rang. The name that appeared on the screen made her heart race. Anna, her best friend and the only person who hadn't abandoned her after the scandal. "Mariana, have you seen the photos?" The voice on the other end of the line sounded tense. "Photos?" Mariana asked, not understanding. Anna took a deep breath before continuing. "Henrique and Camila, they're in the Maldives. They posted everything on Instagram." The world turned. While she barely had enough money to eat, her ex-husband was enjoying a paradisiacal vacation with the woman who destroyed their marriage. Mariana couldn't believe it. She opened her social media with trembling fingers, and there they were, Henrique and Camila, smiling in the sun, toasting with glasses of champagne, while captions like, "Life is made to be lived," appeared below the photos. The humiliation was unbearable. Her heart sank, and something inside her broke completely. Enough! She would no longer allow herself to be the woman left behind. If Henrique had thrown her away as if she were nothing, she would make sure to become someone impossible to ignore. Mariana put down her phone and took a deep breath. Hatred burned inside her, but it wasn't a destructive hatred. It was a different kind of fire, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was determination. She had spent years believing that her worth depended on being the perfect wife. Now she could see everything clearly. Henrique had never wanted a partner. He wanted a shadow. And she, for fear of losing what little she had, accepted that role. But not anymore. That same night she grabbed her old laptop and started researching. What skills did she still have? What could she do to get back into the job market? The answer was harsh, almost nothing, but that didn't stop her. If the problem was a lack of experience, she would find a way to solve it. For hours, she searched for free online courses, read articles, and studied market trends. She went to bed late with her head full of information. The next day she woke up and did something she hadn't done in a long time. She made a decision without fear. She sold what was left of value. Her wedding ring? That was the first to go. Then came the earrings Enrique had given her for her birthday, the watch he had chosen to match. His, each piece sold, was a weight that was being lifted. With the money, she paid for an extra month at the hotel and enrolled in a business management course. She didn't know exactly where that would take her, but she knew she had to start somewhere. Then, the unexpected happened. While she was browsing job sites, an email caught her eye. It was from Grupo Vasconcelos International, one of the largest financial companies in the city. Dear Mariana Torres, we would like to invite you to an interview for the position of administrative assistant. Her heart raced. She had no idea she had sent her resume to this company. Who exactly was responsible for this opportunity, and why were they suddenly interested in her? The next morning, Mariana put on her best outfit, the only decent one she had left. She spent the night rehearsing her answers, trying to sound confident. But deep down, the insecurity was still there, haunting her like a ghost. What if this was just another interview that would end with a "we'll get back to you"? What if they were just messing with her? But it didn't matter. She would go. The Vasconcelos International Group building was imposing, a glass tower in the city's financial heart. Upon entering, she felt small in the face of the grandeur of the space, but she forced herself to maintain her posture. The receptionist guided her to an exclusive elevator, and, minutes later, Mariana found herself in front of the Human Resources Director. The woman observed her for a long time before speaking. Your resume doesn't show recent experience, but your exams were excellent, she said, leafing through some papers. The position is direct assistant to the company president. You should know that he has a history of being demanding. Mariana took a deep breath. Demanding. She'd already dealt with a controlling husband, a humiliating divorce, and the loss of everything she knew. What else could break her? I'm willing to work hard, she said firmly. The director raised her eyebrows, surprised by the determination in her voice. Great, she finally said. The job is yours. You start tomorrow. That night, as Mariana was organizing her few belongings, she felt something different. For the first time in months, she wasn't being dragged along by life. She was taking control of her own destiny. What she didn't know was that the next day, when she walked through the doors of that company, she would meet someone who would change her path forever. The next morning, Mariana arrived early at Grupo Vasconcelos Internacional. The environment was luxurious, professional, completely different from any other place she had ever worked. She felt out of place, but she wouldn't show it. She was there on merit, on effort, and she wouldn't let anyone make her doubt that. She was taken to the 40th floor, where the man who would define her future in the company was waiting for her, Rodrigo Alcantara. The group's president was known for his coldness and perfectionism. Few people could stand working with him for long. Mariana knew she would face a challenge, but she was no longer in a position to back down in the face of difficulties. When she entered the room, she found a tall man in an impeccable suit, with an analytical look and a firm voice. Rodrigo didn't even look up when he saw her. I'm not interested in your personal life, he said, flipping through some documents. I just want results. Mariana nodded. That's what she was there for. To prove that she could be more than just the cheated-on ex-wife. And the first few days were hell. Rodrigo demanded absolute perfection. Any mistake was pointed out without the slightest patience. Reports had to be delivered on time. The coffee, always at the right temperature. Mariana arrived early, left late, and still it seemed like it was never enough. But then something changed. An opportunity arose, one exhausting night, while organizing documents, Mariana found a serious error in an important contract. She thought about ignoring it, but something inside her told her to act. She gathered her courage and knocked on Rodrigo's office door. He looked up impatiently. "What now?" Mariana held out the paper. "If we signed this like this, we could lose millions." Rodrigo took the document, studied it in silence, and after a long moment, looked up. For the first time, his eyes met hers. "Good job," he said. And that was the beginning of everything. From that day on, something in the dynamic between them changed. Rodrigo was still demanding, still expected perfection, but Mariana noticed that he began to listen to her more. Now, instead of just taking orders, she made suggestions. In meetings, he asked her opinion. Small victories. She was proving her worth. But the challenges didn't stop. There were nights when she thought about giving up. When Rodrigo rejected a report for a minor error or completely ignored her efforts, the old insecurity returned. Did she really belong there? But then she remembered Henrique, the photos in the Maldives, the cold message that the lawyers will be in touch. And that rekindled her determination. She would not go back to being the woman left behind. The real test came at a crucial meeting with foreign investors. Rodrigo was presenting an ambitious project, but in the middle of the negotiation, the system failed. The projector went dark, the graphics disappeared, and the silence in the room became deafening. Everyone began to look at each other, waiting for someone to resolve the situation. It was then that Mariana took a deep breath, grabbed a marker, and stood up. "I can present without the slides," she said confidently. For 20 minutes, she improvised a detailed explanation of the project, drawing diagrams on the board, using numbers and data she had memorized. When she finished, the room was silent. One of the foreign investors smiled and said something in French that Mariana didn't understand. Rodrigo, standing next to her, translated. He said he hadn't seen anyone so prepared in years. And then the contracts were signed. As she left the meeting, Rodrigo turned to her. That was impressive. For the first time, there was something different in his eyes. It was admiration. That night, as she organized the final documents from the meeting, Mariana realized that something inside her had changed. She was no longer the insecure woman who had walked into that office weeks ago. Now, she had a voice. She had presence, and most of all, she had respect. Rodrigo was not an easy man to impress, but after that day, he began to see her differently. The following days confirmed this. He started calling her to more important meetings and trusted her to make decisions that he used to make alone. Even the company's employees started to look at Mariana differently. She was no longer just the new assistant. She was someone who made a difference. And, little by little, Rodrigo started to show something that no one expected: consideration. The little signs started to appear, the way he held the door for her, the way he asked if everything was okay after a hard day. How he noticed one day that she hadn't eaten lunch and sent a plate of food to her table without saying anything. Mariana tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was just professionalism. But then there was that moment. One night, after an exhausting day, they stayed up late, finalizing a contract. The office was silent, just the two of them. Rodrigo closed his folder, sighed, and for the first time broke the distance he had always maintained. "You've realized that you're much more than you think you are, haven't you?" The question took Mariana by surprise. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that disarmed her. He truly saw her. And at that moment, for the first time since it all began, she saw herself too. That moment changed everything. Mariana felt a lump in her throat, not because of fatigue or the stress of work, but because Rodrigo was right. She had spent years diminishing herself, molding herself into what others expected of her. Now, for the first time, someone saw her for who she really was: strong, capable, valuable. But she couldn't allow herself to feel anything other than that. Not now. In the days that followed, she tried to act as if nothing had happened, but it was impossible. Rodrigo was different, not in words, but in gestures. Their conversations became longer, less rigid. He listened to her more, and Mariana found herself observing him in a way she never had before. It was dangerous. She knew she had to remain professional. But the problem was that, with each passing day, it became more difficult. The defining moment came when, during a corporate event, Mariana saw something she hadn't expected. Enrique. Her ex-husband was there, in the same room where he had humiliated her months ago. Only this time, it was different. He wasn't as radiant as before. There was something dull in his gaze, a less confident posture. And then his eyes met hers. He froze. Not because he saw her, but because she was no longer the woman he had discarded. Rodrigo, who was standing next to her, noticed. "It's him, isn't it?" Mariana nodded without looking away. Enrique approached slowly, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. "Mariana, you're different," he said, his voice more hesitant than it had ever been. She smiled. "Yes, Enrique, I've changed." And in that moment she realized she didn't feel angry. She felt liberation. It took Enrique a few seconds to say anything. He looked at her as if he were trying to put together the pieces of an impossible puzzle. Perhaps, for the first time, he was seeing the woman he had thrown away. "Can we talk?" he asked, in a tone that Mariana recognized immediately, the tone of someone who realized they had lost something valuable. But before she could answer, Rodrigo took a subtle step forward, positioning himself next to her in a way that left no doubt. Mariana was not alone. "She has an event to manage now," he said, with the cold calm that made him a respected and feared man. Enrique pressed his lips together, visibly uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say that—" "I'm sorry," he murmured, looking away. Mariana took a deep breath. She no longer felt anger or hurt, just overwhelming relief. She had won, not because he regretted it, but because she no longer needed his validation. "I accept your apology," she replied, emotionless. "But honestly, Enrique, I thank you." He frowned, confused. "Thank you? For what?" She smiled, and there was truth in her gaze. "For leaving me. It was the best thing you've ever done for me." Without waiting for an answer, Mariana turned and walked away. Rodrigo followed her, without saying anything, but when they left the room, he finally broke the silence. "You deserved this moment," he said simply. Mariana stopped and looked at him. "And I didn't even have to make a fuss," she joked, trying to ease the tension. But Rodrigo only stared at her for a second longer than necessary before muttering, "He never deserved you." Rodrigo's comment took her by surprise. It wasn't said with arrogance or anger. It was simply a fact. Something about the way he was looking at her at that moment made her heart race in a way she hadn't expected. She tried to laugh it off, to make light of the situation. But for the first time she felt like she didn't have to prove anything. He already saw her worth. In the following days, Mariana noticed that something had changed between them. Rodrigo was still demanding and professional, but now there was a silent complicity. Small gestures that hadn't existed before, like when he held the door for her to pass through, or when, without realizing it, their eyes would meet during a meeting and stay there for a second longer than necessary. It was subtle, but it was there. What wasn't? Subtle happened one Friday night when they stayed late finishing a project. The office was empty and the silence between them felt different. Mariana ran her hand over her face, exhausted. Rodrigo closed the folder of documents and studied her for a moment before asking, "Why did you take this job?" She smiled, not sure how to answer. "Because I needed to start over." He nodded slowly. "What now?" She took a deep breath before answering. "Now, I think I've finally found myself." His gaze softened. "Me too," he said, almost in a whisper, and then it happened. Rodrigo took a step forward and Mariana didn't back away. There was no fear, no doubt, just the certainty that for the first time she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The kiss happened naturally, as if it were the inevitable conclusion of something that had been silently building. There was no rush, no hesitation, just two paths that, after so many twists and turns, finally met at the same destination. Rodrigo held her firmly but carefully, as if he knew the weight of that moment for her, and Mariana, for the first time in a long time, was not afraid to give herself over. When they walked away, a silence filled with meaning filled the room. Rodrigo watched her for a moment, as if searching for some doubt in her face. "Was that a mistake?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Mariana smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. "No," she answered without hesitation. "It was exactly what needed to happen." From that day on, everything changed, but not in the way she had feared. At the office, they continued to be the same professionals as always. Rodrigo never used his position to cross boundaries, never treated her differently than others. But in the moments when they were alone, there was something new, something strong, something that didn't need to be said to be real. The real test came a few weeks later, when Mariana noticed something was off. Little signs began to appear: unusual fatigue, morning sickness. At first she ignored them, chalking it up to stress. But when a sudden dizziness made her hold onto the table during a meeting, Rodrigo was the first to notice. "Are you okay?" His gaze was filled with genuine concern. Mariana tried to hide it, but something inside her told her it was time to face the truth. Deep down, she already knew. That night, alone in her apartment, Mariana held a pregnancy test in her hands. Time seemed to slow down as she stared at those two pink lines. Positive. Her heart raced, an avalanche of thoughts crashing inside her. How was this possible? How could her life take a new turn so quickly? Was she ready for this? She slept little that night. The next day, as she got ready for work, she felt the weight of the decision she had to make. Would she tell Rodrigo? Part of her wanted to hide, to avoid the difficult conversation, to pretend nothing was happening, but the other part knew she couldn't run away. Rodrigo had always been direct, sincere. He deserved to know. And deep down, Mariana knew that running away was no longer part of who she was. She waited until the end of the day. When everyone had left, she took a deep breath and knocked on the door to his office. Rodrigo looked up immediately, noticing the seriousness in her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping the papers on the table. Mariana felt her stomach churn, nervousness trying to take over her. But then she remembered everything she had already faced. She was no longer the fragile woman she once was. "I'm pregnant," he said bluntly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rodrigo was looking at her, but his expression was unreadable. Mariana waited for some reaction, any reaction. But instead of panic or coldness, Rodrigo just let out a long sigh and ran his hand over his face. "Okay," he murmured, getting up from his chair and walking towards her. "Are you okay?" That question took her by surprise. He didn't ask if it was right. He didn't question anything. He just worried about her, and it was at that moment that Mariana knew she wasn't alone. Mariana felt the weight lift from her shoulders in that moment. She had expected so many different reactions: shock, denial, doubt, but she hadn't expected this. Rodrigo didn't hesitate, didn't question. He just cared. His eyes studied her intently, as if he was trying to absorb the news completely. "I didn't expect this," he admitted, crossing his arms. "But if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the best things happen without warning." Mariana felt a tear escape, not of sadness, but of relief. She wouldn't have to face this alone. Rodrigo stepped forward, took her hands and squeezed gently. "If you want this, I'm here. For anything." She didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time being discarded, ignored, treated as if her worth depended on someone else, that now, with someone truly by her side, she didn't know how to react. But she did. Know one thing: she wanted this. Maybe she was still afraid. Maybe she still didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time, she felt like she was where she was supposed to be. In the months that followed, Mariana found a new balance. The work was still demanding, but Rodrigo made sure she didn't overwhelm herself. And unlike what she had experienced before, this time there was no control, but rather partnership. He was by her side at every appointment, helped her prepare the house for the baby's arrival, and most importantly, reminded her every day that she didn't have to be strong all the time. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he said one night, as he held her growing belly. "You're already amazing, just the way you are." And it was at that moment that Mariana realized that her greatest victory wasn't getting over Enrique. It was finally finding herself. Time passed faster than Mariana could have imagined. In just a few months, her life had changed. Completely. From an abandoned and aimless woman, she had become someone with a purpose, a career, and now, a family. News of her pregnancy began to circulate around the company, and to her surprise, the looks that had previously been of distrust were now of respect. Rodrigo made sure to make it clear that she remained firm in her position, that being a mother did not mean that she would lose everything she had worked for. One day, while reviewing important documents, she received an unexpected email. It was a court notice about the finalization of her divorce from Enrique, the final chapter in that story. Mariana stared at the screen for a few minutes, expecting to feel something: anger, sadness, regret. But there was only relief. She was finally free. As a symbol of closure, she opened a drawer, took out an old photo from her wedding, and threw it in the trash. There was nothing left for her there. But Enrique hadn't given up yet. A few weeks later, he showed up at the company. Mariana was on her way out to lunch when she saw him waiting in the lobby. He looked different, more dejected, less confident. "Can we talk?" he asked. This time Mariana didn't hesitate. "We have nothing to talk about, Enrique," she said firmly. But he persisted. "I made a mistake. I know it took me a while to realize it, but I miss you." She looked at him, feeling sorry for him. Not because she still loved him, but because she saw a man who had destroyed his own life with his choices. And now, he wanted her to come back and pick up the pieces. Mariana took a deep breath and said, without a hint of resentment, "The problem, Enrique, is that when you had the chance to value me, you chose to discard me. Now it's too late." And with that she turned her back, leaving him behind, just like he had once done with her. After that day, Mariana never thought about Enrique again. He was just a distant memory of a life that no longer belonged to her. Now, her focus was on her present and the future she was building. Every day she felt stronger and more confident. Rodrigo continued to be her greatest support, and together they were creating something that went far beyond work. They were building a family. The birth of Lucas Alcantara Torres was a moment Mariana would never forget. Rodrigo was by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. When the little one cried for the first time, something inside her broke. It was the sound of her greatest achievement. It no longer mattered what she had lost in the past, because there, holding her son in her arms, she knew she had gained everything. In the months that followed, Mariana balanced motherhood and career in a way she never imagined possible. Rodrigo made changes to the company to ensure that she had flexibility without having to give up her position. More than a leader, he became her partner in every way. Grupo Vasconcelos grew even more, and now Mariana was no longer just an employee. She was one of the company's key players, and then one special night Rodrigo prepared a surprise dinner. Halfway through the meal, he took out a small velvet box and placed it on the table. Mariana held her breath. "You always told me that you didn't need anything else to feel complete," he began, "but I want you to know that I choose you every day, and I want you to choose me too." When he opened the box, revealing a ring, Mariana felt her eyes well up. She had never needed a happy ending. But right then, in that moment, she realized she was living one. Mariana looked at Rodrigo, her heart filled with gratitude and happiness. He was no longer just the man she worked with. He was the man who helped her rebuild herself, to understand that she never needed anyone's approval to be amazing. Now, by his side, she knew that the future would be hers, not because he was perfect, but because she had earned it. And as he placed the ring on her finger, she realized that, after so many losses, she had found her true place. By his side, by her son's side, she was finally at peace. If this story touched your heart and made you believe that no matter how difficult things seem, there is always a chance for redemption and a new beginning, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and turn on notifications. Share this story with someone who needs a little inspiration, and remember that even in adversity, there is always a chance to turn pain into strength. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. We love to hear where you're from.